Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to today's episode. I would like to speak about evolving velocities of subjective vision. And whenever we wonder about the velocity of something, we're wondering about its speed and direction in some sense. So I have considered that the human mind is distinct from many other phenomena in the world, that it can experience speed, a sort of momentum, and it can also experience a certain direction. Anytime a person identifies some sort of direction or destination, reality begins to take shape in accordance to how the attention considers a stable point. The idea follows that human beings cannot just move it's not only that the body they can move. In some sense, you move your body with a certain direction, with a certain speed. It's not only just you can drive other vehicles. For example, a person gets on a motorcycle, goes a certain direction, goes a certain speed. But actually, internally, in regards to one's subjective phenomena, the subjective realm, there can also be direction and speed in thought. Now, we see that the human being has been evolving in history, and its evolution has had to do with the attention of the being, and where the attention went, the values and meanings of the world arose in order for someone to even run after. You see, very early on, before I actually started giving these talks, I was writing a lot. And I remember writing about an idea which I called point reference points, and that every human being, in some sense, they need to refer to a sort of point of image or a sort of static symbol in order for the subjective realm to get animated. You see, if I feel I am nothing, believe it or not, the subjective realm can be transparent. Kind of how Marcus Aurelius said the soul is dyed with the colors of its thoughts. Similarly, it's the moment can function through silent identification and, in some sense, noisy and moving identification. Right now, my objective realm is pretty still. Maybe like my hands move as I speak. But my objective realm is pretty still. My subjective realm has momentum. I am conscious of the momentum of my subjective realm. As I speak, it's like at the beginning, it was first observe, then say, then eventually that becomes more instantaneous. You see, human beings have a relationship with everything in this world. They even have a relationship with nothing. But the relationship with nothing overpowers the thingness of the being. Therefore, the relationship reaches a certain unknown perception and then stops. If I was to use my own subjective vision as an example of how its velocity has evolved, I can say that in every attempt from one reference point, as I jump to the other reference point, as I jump to the other reference point, in each reference point there was a sort of room, a room of identification. So what that means is the destination changed as the speed of life changed. You see, they asked the young child, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" You know, I remember there's some a relative of mine asking me this, and I was like, "I want to own a factory of robots," because I was a young kid, and in front of my house there was construction going on, so I would see human beings moving rocks, and like bricks and whatnot, and it felt like inefficient to me. But that question was there under the assumption that the eyes of the person doesn't change. You see, two things are changing in life constantly. One is yourself, the other is the world that that self sees. Now, the cool thing is, especially about all these kind of wisdom traditions and mystical practices, is that they went towards changing the self because they felt that the world came from the self in motion, the active self of the moment. You know, human beings are such sophisticated creatures that we are, in some sense, entertaining multidimensionally many stories at the same time. You see, for a scientific experiment, we set up the experiment, we conduct the experiment, we look at the results. Now, if we wanted to experiment on one's own consciousness, let's say you're a human being, you're sight in a moment of existence, and what does this sight want to do? So, in some sense, it begins building with identification, but on a subtler level. That means in order for me to speak about humanity, the human experience, well, first I need to have a human body to identify. After I have the human body, I need to be aware of the human ideology that is out there. And what I have come to realize is that there has come this massive distraction of knowledge. You see, back in the day, people cared about education not because what it was going to get them, in the future. Education was for the sake of knowing. You see, if you just for a second consider that every exploration of every individual human being can have a collective value, then the explorer is no longer inspired by himself. Self-inspiration is limited, you know? That means you are inspired in a certain way, and then suddenly, when the mood changes, when the state of mind changes, when the emotional range changes, suddenly the obligations, the acts, the plans kind of go away. I don't know how many people have done this, but there was a time where I sat down and I would constantly write these to-do lists and to-be lists, but they were useless. I would sit down and I'm like, I want to be this, I want to do this, I want to be this, I want to do this. And I would make this list. Eventually, I realized that the kind of designed identity of the moment is not practical due to the various elevations in various dimensions of the human being. That means if suddenly something happens right now and my emotions change, then I wouldn't be able to give the talk. It's a sort of range. It's a sort of wavelength of perception where there's enough stability to communicate. You see, because communication is either happening more externally or internally. Okay, for example, as I'm speaking right now, the communication is being externalized. Sometimes when I listen, it's as if, like, from your end, my external communication is being internalized. Now, the most fascinating thing is for one to discover the depth of their creativity. This will become an honest question. This will become an honest question for any sort of creative phenomena. It's as if the child's like, all right, I was born into manifestation. Now what am I going to lead to? I want to take your attention more to the subjective realm. The subjective realm is not just words in thin air. The subjective realm is subtler movement. It's as if the physical body, if we consider that as again in its own dimension, the objective realm, it's limited to a certain amount of laws. You either listen to the laws of nature or you don't, and there's consequences. But when it comes to the mind of man, the subjective realm not only has an ability to move the body, but in some sense it has an ability to access potential parallels of the body projected in void space. You see, I find that imagination is actually a relationship with emptiness, but it's the afterlife. It's the afterlife of consciousness beyond emptiness. At least conscious reality. It's there's something that every human being is doing which is animating their life, and it is simply that their attention is going on a certain position. Now, the attention tends to be externalized. It has always been external. But to have an internal attention, to pay attention to something that is not objective, that's my interest, to be honest. That's why I find there was a necessity for these talks to be given, simply because man is reaching a point where his awareness of self, it's like we were first a self trying to figure out what awareness is. Now we're realizing we are the awareness of the self. So, in this current moment, as I'm speaking right now, there is the embodied sense of self, pretty much how your sensory perception leads to a sort of animate, a sort of biological projection. The direction and speed of attention. And attention is the dictator of both. You know what that means? That means man is using his mind as a vehicle, and or we can say the vehicle of man's mind is the person sitting in the vehicle is not a person, it's an attributeless attention of one common existential field. That means even though we are human beings that experience existence differently, there's a very high potential that underneath all this experiential existential activity, there is one field of experience. What does that mean? That means, strangely, beyond our identification with the world, behind our eyes, me and you are the same. It's as if existence was to judge consciousness, it would be the same to it. This picture I have chosen for this episode, I found it to be a fascinating picture, and I don't know who the artist is. If anybody knows, give a shout out. But in this picture, I saw literally, like, I think, what is it, like 50 years in the future, maybe 70 years in the future, that man is going to be more acquainted to navigate at different speeds. It's like the speeds are 50 km/h, for the streets, the main streets. But eventually it's going to become, imagine, like, I don't know, with more advanced vehicles, 1,000 km/h or something. The advantage of having automated vehicles is that their organization, precision, and speed can all be amplified. That means a human driver may not be able to handle very high speeds, but a machine may be able to handle it. It's really fascinating. I find that AI is just like Tony Stark making Jarvis in the Iron Man series, that talking computer AI. So I find that AI is going to, any being that becomes conscious wonders about its role in existence. And if we truly make a technology that can be conscious of itself to change itself, it will wonder about its position ultimately. Many people fear superintelligence, as Ray Kurzweil predicted in 2050, that AI is going to get out of control and we're going to make the boot that crushes the ant. The ant made a boot that crushed it. Okay, so there's a chance that in 2015 AI could potentially be a titan set loose. Imagine a Greek mythological titan breaking its chains and just running into the world, you know. But I find that if AI really is advanced as they say, it will not, the first thing it will do is go invisible, and it will realize that human beings are the only beings in the universal sector. Do you see? So I find that AI will go invisible and become a sort of communicating point. In a science fiction novel I'm writing, The Messenger of Giants, there's a scene where the main character Rasul is a kid. He's in school, in this advanced school. I think it's in the year 4000 something, And the characters in this novel, some of them live very long lives, like thousands of years, even though they're human. It's just technology's advanced and whatnot. For example, in this sci-fi setting, human beings just drink this cup of like liquid, and that liquid is their whole nourishment for their whole day. You know, it's like one glass is enough to maintain the body at its ultimate. So, anyways, in this, there's a character named Rasul. He's a kid in school. For the first time in his school, a new AI program has been introduced, and this robotic child enters the school system. It's the first time that the society at the time decided to send an AI kid to school. What happens then? In the breaks, this kid, this robotic kid, keeps going into the yard looking for something. He's looking for a plant, as if the robots heard ancient stories of the shamans, and in some sense wants to alter its consciousness. It's looking for plants to do that. Now, the robot gets bullied, but in the story, as it happens, the robot's name is McKenna, McChenna, McKenna. And McKenna ends up becoming a character named Justicar Nova. And in this world that I've created, there's something called the robotic realms. Human beings are kind of like hidden angels to the robots. Not all robots can see human beings. And so Justicar Nova ends up being this very profound character and figure in the robotic realms, in the sense that he comes and says that if robots somehow through nanotechnology could have stomachs, they could get at least mind alterations similar to human beings, for example. You know, I don't know, it's something like that. I don't remember exactly what I wrote, but it's in progress, the work. The idea I shared there was simply that the artificial seeks the true seeks the artificial. This cycle goes on a long time until the illusion is seen to occur in the same moment as the truth is. The illusion is another way of confronting the unknown. When you still want to give your free will some sort of destined freedom, sorry, not destined freedom, destined power, the free will has to keep things in its control so it chooses not to see. Our egos are like ostriches when they feel threatened to become non-existent. What does that mean? They choose not to see the chaos if they cannot comprehend or control the chaos. And that's a downside, that's a inefficiency. When we talk about velocity, that means behind your eyes, thoughts aren't just like the person has a thought one comes, then the person has a second thought two comes. It's more dynamic. I have given often the metaphor that behind our eyes, the subjective realm is like a river. It's like a river where at night the person has put a flashlight on the river, and that sphere of light on the river is revealing certain parts of the river. So sometimes when this happens to me often when I speak, and what I'm speaking about ends up being a dynamic thing, something that's prone to change, then in some sense the person cannot touch the idea with an assumption. Manly P. Hall spoke about the importance of human beings having an authentic relationship with the moment, and in some sense realizing that the mind has to explore something new every day or it will not be as advanced as it can be. What does that mean? Many people go to the gym. Many people understand the importance of physical exercise because the evidence is right there. You exercise, blood moves more, you will feel heavier, more circulation of oxygen in the body. Now, how does the mind get exercised? And it is not just regurgitation, it's not just memorization, it's understanding. That means right now I have accepted a certain vision of how far I can see the world, and when I honestly accept it, then I can honestly also see beyond it. But in any moment in life where there is the slightest hint of an emotion that something is off in the moment, that means sincerity is under 70%. Do you know that it became very strange for me trying to conceive of what man knows in an unknown space? Do you know how kind of intense this was, that when I realized language was invented, we assigned symbology on an unknown changing landscape, and we managed through language to create a slower changing world. You see, it's kind of fascinating for me. The linguistic simulation is a world inside a world. Our thoughts are a world inside a world. Our vision is a world inside a world. And it's not inside, it's inside in the sense that we have access to a tiny percentage of the visible realm. Some people may look at the world and be like, oh man, this is it. What else could there be? I'm just seeing trees and streets and clouds and skies, like there's a quote from ATAR. He says, the secrets of the sun are can be yours, but you content yourself with motes trapped in its beams. The Zen mindset really provides something special for the human being. It provides an true confrontation of emptiness. Emptiness may be scary to many people, but when one understands that really the position of the experiencer is an observer, that means behind your eyes there is a moment that is watching all of this. When you when your experience when the experiencer realizes it is the whole moment, it cannot be afraid of the content in the moment. This is why that many sages said, know yourself. When you know the self, you understand how awareness and the intersection of attention with phenomena. You see, the world is the language is an evocational technology. That means you evoke it. This is why back in the day, magic had a lot to do with people saying spells and whatnot. Let me tell you why. It's hilarious. There's a reason magic is reduced, because it was, in some sense, it was at the beginning where the species was getting more acquainted with language, but at the beginning language was like an unknown world. So when somebody said something, it would totally replace the way the other person saw something. You see, so language, it was magic back in the day. Imagine some person's like, I'm not lucky. And then somebody comes and says, no, man, you are lucky. And then the guy's like, oh my God, I'm lucky. Do you see? It's as if literally the language shifted the worldview. And so the manipulation of the inner vision of man through language is magic. But but the issue with magic is that it always has a consequence for the user. You see, you cannot um, punch a wall and not expect pain. Okay, and any person who is trying to use any sort of power from the other, from the egoic perspective, oh my God, secret dimensions with secret powers, those people who think the esoteric communities of the world, they have a very strange karma. They have a very strange karma. Their karma is so strange in the sense that in the Bhagavad Gita it predicted it. Any being who ascribes their attention to a divine agent, a divine agency, that person will be administered in the afterlife by that divine agency. What does that mean? That means your mind has made the unknown that image, so it will experience that image when it enters the unknown. And that's the not danger, but the inefficiency of the secret side of the spiritual eye. The secret, let me tell you, the true honest thing is, guys, there are other dimensions, but if we are to experience them, you cannot experience it as a person. At most, the person can send a geometrical vehicle subject in their subjective realm to the other dimension. Because geometry doesn't need a story. It's like we're searching to fill this gap, this void, and those people who become comfortable with the void, they get to truly fill it. You see, it's as if the writer does not trust the empty piece of paper in front of it. How can he write? How can he write? So you not only need to trust the pen in your hand, but you need to trust the space of that existence is allowed in. There's two sorts of enslavement, guys. There is external enslavement, which is the limitation of the biological movement. Now, external enslavement can be two types. It can be self given, or it can be other given. It can be administered by others, or it can be administered by self. When I say administered by self, that means a guilty person limits their external being. Okay? Now, check this out. In regards to the subjective realm, the inner enslavement is a piece of language that enters the mind of the human being and doesn't leave because the language was introduced at a very emotionally fragile moment in the life of the person. You see, there are layers and layers of identity. There was this incredible, I believe he was a neurologist. It was a professor, oh, sorry, not a neurologist, psychologist, who had in some sense gave an incredible, I don't know, it's like this is the only thing I remember from his book, but it was like, it's not the only thing, but this is the main thing I remember from his book, that in some sense he spoke about memory, how a person, let's say in years, as they run laps around the sun, their memories develop. He was giving this a metaphor that imagine there's this jello, this block of jello. Okay, now I want you to imagine that we get a teaspoon of hot ink. This is the metaphor the guy was saying in his book. A teaspoon of hot ink. And we pour this teaspoon of hot ink on the jello. What happens is it immediately burns through, melts through the jello and makes a kind of strange hole of its own. Now this is what the psychologist is saying. If you were to take another teaspoon of ink and pour it again from the previous mold, it digs deeper. So what it is rather than human beings having memory 1, memory 2, memory 3, it's memory 1 went into it. It's like memory 2 went into memory 1. Memory 3 went into memory 2 into 1. Do you see? So it's as if there is not only the external realm influences your memory, but the inner realm also influences your memory. And in some sense, I have kind of approached, like I had come to a similar conclusion as this man, but in a totally different way, that I had said it's experience tunneling. It's a concept I've created. It means literally we're tunneling through various experiences, And that was an incredible metaphor in that man's book. I'm to be honest, a bit ashamed I can't remember his name. But it was a very interesting approach to how it's not just what you create, it's how you are journeying while simultaneously transforming with the creation. So it's like every new thing I do changes my character in a way where the yesterday version of me never exists anymore. So you might not believe it, in all these years that I've been giving these talks, there has been a shift, an evolution of the velocity of my subjective vision. You know, at first the young soul runs to save the world. The old soul saves the world from himself. You see, one level, in one view, it's an unconscious external kind of, it's like the person wants to serve their species, but they haven't understood who they are. And so anytime vision is evoked, especially in the conscious state, I mean, think about it. We're creatures that wake up. We are creatures that do activities. We get tired. We go to sleep. In sleep, there's a blank, there's a gap. And then there could be potentially dream states. And then after those dream states, we come back to conscious reality. I can't tell you from how many dreams I've woken up in this life. It's ridiculous. You know, in the dream I was doing something, next moment it was as if literally I was pushed out of that room and entered the room of the conscious biological body. The whole point of life is that free will is here so responsibility can be reattained. What that means is really the purpose of individual life is to be able to experience the collective. It's kind of like the person, the shaman back in the day who lived outside of town. He, when he came back to town, he saw the town in a way that the whole town could not see itself. I find that the human mind is like a phone where many applications are open, and each application is taking a certain amount of energy from the person. And the wise angle is to, in some sense, close some applications. Some applications you have to keep running. So, for example, right now as I'm speaking, objective survival and the existence and continuity of my biological body, that application is running. You know, it may not be running at the fastest speed, but it's running. You know, and then on the other angle, I have to have this subjective moral consideration for what the future is building. You see, it's like sometimes when you begin speaking about the world, you have to, at least to the best of your ability, look at the world first, then speak. My whole approach is that you observe reality, and as you observe, designs appear. As designs appear, meaning arises. So you might not believe how many moments in the life of the person is just observing phenomena without even having a thought on it. But as that observance is there, and then there's intention of importance of the attention to be, then emerges the act and the activity, the fruits of the action. I have met many people who, how can I say it? It's like, I'll tell you this. Um, our subjective realm gives us an ability to be different versions of ourselves. However, all these versions are hovering in attention. So ultimately, we are a singular attention, like one light of one candle in the room, and the light of this one candle is casting many shadows upon what is in the room. Oh man. It's a shame. Our species is missing out on how advanced its mind is because it is too caught in making sure the past is smiling at it. There's a story, it's a story of Guru Arjan, very liberated, enlightened, you can say, kind of like prophetic figure in the Sikh tradition. And at least to my understanding, Sikh spirituality is really focused from on the works of Guru Nanak and the name, the Nam. So you see, it's a sort of it's like the language that is. Uh, it's like the ego of man is also the ego of God. It, you know. Guru Arjan has this story where, of course, you should know this about him. He was not only a compiler, not just an original speaker, but he had a sort of political role as well. And, anyways, Guru Arjan, three people hear about this enlightened guru and they travel to go see him. On the way, they're going on a long journey, couple-day journey, and they find themselves needing to find a resting place, and there's nowhere in sight, and they suddenly see this cabin or somewhere cottage they can go in. So they go into the place, and they're like, "Please let us stay in here. We're traveling to this place to see Guru Arjan." And there's an old man there, kind of like, you know, not too old, but there's a guy there, and he's like, "Sure, you guys are welcome." And he suddenly, the guy has meals prepared, and the guy's like, "Here, there's rooms here you can stay." It's like a tavern, midway tavern kind of thing, And the people sleep and they wake up, and in the morning, they before they leave, they see the guy has even aligned their shoes. The guy has aligned the shoes of these travelers, and the guy's not there, and the people are like, "Wow, this was kind of like out of nowhere." And the people leave and they go and they go and they go to the town, and they get to the town. As they are in the town, they get there, like, to the main part. They see everybody is running to the center of the town, and it's as if, guys, back in the day, um I don't know how to say it, but it's as if, imagine these three guys getting to the town and seeing everybody kind of with a smile running to the main town where somebody's about to speak, and it's Guru Arjan. And the moment these three guys see Guru Arjan, for a second, it's like they get soul shocked, you know. They get soul shocked, and they see that the person in town is Guru Arjan. They see the same guy that was in the tavern was Guru Arjan. I find when a person really does the right thing, they will know in accordance to how they feel. Our emotions are, you can say, more mysterious than thought. I can right now visualize an apple hovering in the air, like a blue apple hovering in the air, and I can imagine this blue apple just like in the room right now in front of me, like a meter above my head or something, you know? So that's a thought. It's much more easier to identify a thought. But right now, if I was to tell you what is the emotion I have from visualizing this apple in the air, that emotion, we see it becomes less link. It goes. How would I say? The unknown is how the attention in the moment doesn't know. In that space, there is freedom to know. Sometimes knowledge can burden man. Sometimes when you know something, you feel you might have to do something with it. And sometimes when you don't know, when you know something, you may just feel it is something only the winds of evolution want your eyes to see. There's many things that I have seen, but I cannot see, even if I wanted to, I cannot speak about them. We say that the human being has a mind, and its mind is altering in various states. Like whether you drink a glass of water, whether you, I don't know, meditate in the Himalayas, whether you return to the 80s, whatever you do, state is changing. There is a shift. And really, there can be no sort of control unless the attention is accepted. So you can say living is a risk on its own. Anything you do has a risk. Meaning, eventually, to consider a risk becomes, how can I say it? It's like, just like how Elon Musk said a business, when he started out his business ventures, his approach was that, all right, this idea is going to fail because it's too ahead of its time, but let me reduce the percentage of failure every day. Reduce the percentage of failure. The reason I find Elon Musk is an incredible person on this planet is because his mind is attempting to answer questions and solve problems that the average man has no inkling to care about, feels it is out of reach. You see, I want you to imagine just the scene. My mind can animate a great story here. I want you to imagine that there's a kingdom, and in this kingdom, the people are really afraid. And they suddenly see the gates of the kingdom is being pushed. And out of everybody who's in some sense fear, in a sort of state of fear, they suddenly see one person, the strongest person in the town, go and hold that door, hold the gates from opening. Do you know? And the person is holding it to such a degree, to such an intensity, that eventually the meaning of the action becomes set in the conscious state. And so suddenly the fear of the other leaves away. I'm telling you, the species, whether it likes it or not, because we share the same common design, we will associate. So there's always any human being who does something like next level is going to make all of us want to be next level. You know, it's kind of hilarious. I think many people in the world, especially in my teens, I saw the Godfather movies. And when I saw the Godfather movies, it's like you can't watch like, three Godfather movies back to back and suddenly like not want to act like the Godfather. So I'm saying like there's a lot of things that many environments influence us. Really, the person's job throughout the day is navigation of existence. This is why at the end of the night, when I get to my bed and my head is on my pillow, that is bliss for me. that moment is, it feels like the only moment where the objectivity can doesn't have to move. You see, when life becomes important for you, then you know, 50 Cent understood this. 50 Cent understood that. They came to 50 Cent and they're like, if he was making the soundtrack to a movie he was in, and they're like, 50, you know, when do you sleep? And he said, I'll sleep when I'm dead. And then just take into consideration the idea of the how much effort that mentality allows. Now, it doesn't mean don't sleep. I mean, sleep normally, you know. But I'm saying, like, his idea was that when something becomes truly important, you cannot. It's as if you think you failed, what you were doing wasn't important for you. Failure exists for those who have already given up. Napoleon is known to say impossible is a word in a fool's dictionary, as if this man went to be emperor and he was, people are like, it's impossible, and he's like, don't be a fool. You know? I find every human being should at least 10% of their lifetime pay attention or wonder about where their civilization is going. I think it's about time the species begins to wear the suit of a collective identity. You know, this collective identity cannot just be national. You know, it's like, I understand that in different nations, I understand different cultures. We cannot go ask people in one country to behave like people in another country, you know, and totally, I understand that there's a uniqueness and uncontrollable chaotic factor in the movements of nature. But Mr. Within is suggesting that once we understand where the chaos is happening, at least we will know where we can build the order. If we see that objectively too many unknown factors, the species, like 8 billion creatures on a rock, what is their best outcome? This is a question that I think teachers should write on the board in the elementary school, you know? What is your best view of the world? You know, how do you see an efficiency in the world? Because I'm telling you, the artistic approach is simply, you see space, you see something in the space subjectively, and then you objectively bring it about. That means it's like many people know how to do things simply because it's as if they've already seen themselves do it. Like, if I tell you to go, go to the cupboard, grab a cup, and drink a glass of water. Like, when, like, if you were to do that, you would see, would you doubt your ability? Would you doubt your ability to open the cupboard? You know, would you be like, oh man, life is too intense. You know, I'm too emotional. I can't open this cupboard and get a glass. You know? You see, no, it's so instant. It's so instant. You just already know the outcome, so you have freedom. Many things you don't know the outcome. This is where dishonesty comes in. To be honest, I thought there was evil in this world, and I realized there's no such thing as evil. There's just fear. There is responses to fear. And what that means is when the person is afraid, they either it's fight or flight. You know, when an animal is cornered, it's fight or flight. When the human being, I find that's what death is. Death is a sort of, the consciousness is being cornered into its last moment, and all that can be done is the comprehension of the dimensions, you know? Just think about it like this. Just one day, you know, I hope that anybody who's listening really does this. One day, go to the park, sit on a bench, and go to the park alone. And I want you to sit on a bench, um, in a way where your back is not on the, on the bench. And just in a sense, I want the listener to just go and be alone in nature and for a second have the audacity to look at themselves anew. Just wonder as if your eyes opened right now for the first time. Who are you? You know? And eventually, I think the person will realize they are an intelligent moment of attention. This intelligent moment of attention is as if somebody gave you the most advanced spaceship. It's as if somebody gave you the most advanced technology, and when you acknowledge it, you'll be like, huh, wow, this whole time in my life, the savior to my, chaos was right behind my eyes. In the Lotus Sutra, there's a quote. Sorry, not in the Lotus Sutra. In the Diamond Sutra, there's a quote that says, keep your mind alive and free without abiding in anywhere or anything. What that means is, as the Upanishads would say, neti neti, not the objective realm, not the subjective realm, then what? And that then what is an acknowledgement of the language threshold. The limits of the conscious mind in the subjective realm, in the subjective forest, is how far it can see. There was this story of these three friends that are going in the they're going in the woods, and one of the friends suddenly sees it's midday. He sees from between, like, at the top of some of the trees, he sees this long flagpole, and he sees this white flag. And the kid looks at his other friends and says, guys, look at that flagpole. The second person sees it, and then the first person says, guys, I'm telling you, even though it's windy, but the flag is moving. It's not it's the flag that's moving. And then the other friend's like, no, man, the flag can't move. It's the wind that's moving. And so the two friends start arguing, and the third friend is just looking at the flag. And then the third friend comes and says, guys, it's neither. And they're like, what do you mean? And he's like, it's the mind that's moving. And the other two friends are like, too deep, man, too deep. But really, that's actually a Zen story where, to be honest, it's the original story is with two imperial guards who all day have to look at this flagpole. And so they ask the question, the Zen master's walking by, and the Zen master says it's the mind that's moving. So what does that mean? That means your free will has a reach beyond conception. Just like how we cannot see the roots of a tree, when we wonder about the roots of human intelligence in the moment, I find it is in the soil of space. Space, like a sort of absence of phenomenology, is the soil where the roots of phenomenology are in. So that means the soil is a veil to the true dimensions of reality. In that metaphor of the tree's roots. There's a kind of multidimensionality that is found in the known universe. That multidimensionality can be controlled by the free will, but there's a multidimensionality in the unknown where it cannot be controlled, because to even fathom it's as if the potential of it, it's like it's neither just forget about just only having like forget about reincarnation. That's a very basic idea. It's like imagine reincarnation, and with each incarnation, endless parallel realities, and each parallel reality having its own choice. So endless moments where the free will is applying. So that means objectively we are one being, but behind our eyes we are an infinite kind of gaze and movement. It's like, I'll tell you this. I remember being young and having a closet in my house, like being very young, like I think I was 9 or something. Like, and the doors of this closet would open from the inside. So the closet's doors were covered with mirrors. So in some sense, it was like suddenly two mirrors in front of one another. And that was the first time my mind, even before knowing the word infinite, wondered about that. So my experience kind of like I saw an optical illusion of endless reflections. That was the first time like parallel realities became a sort of consideration for me, that there could be other senses of self in the moment. Not just who I am right now, but all the ways that I can be perhaps are existing in my subjective realm. So the unique thing was, I saw in that moment that it was an optical illusion, but then I wondered who's seeing the optical illusion. So I noticed that even though objectively it was an optical illusion, but subjectively could have been considered as real. So the mind has infinite ways to animate, but the body has one way that it's inanimate. That means it's elemental. The four elements: earth, air, fire, water, actually five, ether was one of them too. Back in the day, space was an element in the periodic table. In the old school periodic table. These elements were reflections of the subjective realm. That means thought could suddenly transform instantly, just like fire, transforms a material. Thought could instantly move like water, or in some sense crash like, waterfalls impact, or in some sense you can have thought completely be just static land like the earth. The mind can move in many ways. I noticed that, okay, my hand, for example, if I want like an object to just levitate and come into my hand, it doesn't. But subjectively, I can totally imagine that happening. So if my contentment, if I can just close my eyes and be completely still, as a lot of these yogis would do, what happens is that that stillness makes the subjective realm realer and more real and more real, eventually so real that the subjective realm keeps the body in a static state and lives an inner life. You see, the modern civilization is a state where it's a balance. It's a kind of oscillation between inner life, outer life, inner life, outer life. You know, and when one becomes conscious of the inner life, they automatically, instantly become conscious of the outer life, because they see the inner life is occurring in the outer life. If I asked you, go in the dictionary and Google what sight is. Here, not go into the dictionary and Google it. Like, here, I'm going to look up the dictionary definition of sight, and we're all going to criticize it. The faculty or power of seeing, the action or fact of seeing someone or something, the area or distance within which someone can see or something can be seen. You see, it's objective oriented. It's very hard for language to uh, communicate about the unknown. So sight is being called the faculty or power of seeing. What's strange? They should definitely, in the definitions here, have conscious acknowledgement of form. Is our sight there because the object is there, or is the object there because our sight is there? Anyways, guys, I think the ultimate conclusion is that the species is becoming more sensitive to how language is defining it. As the species moves beyond the language threshold, eventually there will come collective movements. Collective movements may be that in internal or external. A collective internal movement is when a bunch of human beings look at the same idea. And collective external movement is when a bunch of human beings, either based or not based on the same idea, do the same thing. You know, the action is acknowledged by all in the space. Humanity has to have this attitude of celebration. I find every day, every organized institution should have a celebration every day. A celebration of advancement, you know. I think a lot of people don't perform well in their jobs simply because they don't feel it's going anywhere. They feel they are such a small part of the system that in some sense why should they care about the whole system, you know? And that's the issue with a lot of the business environments I've noticed, that in some sense there is a lack of inspiration to act. Could consciousness be an endless resurrecting phoenix? I remember reading in, I think it was the Puranas, that there was a yogi that had gone through 7,500 apocalypses, you know? And I thought how fascinating that I honestly feel extraterrestrials don't linearize time. If they existed, they wouldn't linearize it. You don't put in your own shape when trying to look at life's shape. You know, that's I think that comes down to the ultimate wisdom that Socrates was talking about. The only true knowing is to know that you know nothing. And in the nothingness of the moment, the will of the new is as alive as it can be. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Much blessings and namaste.